Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar, Team Topologies meets Beyond Budgeting. I have with me Bjarte. Hi Bjarte.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. So today for these 60 minutes, we're going to talk a little bit what is Beyond Budgeting. We're going to talk a little bit what is Team Topologies. And then we go with our experiences to talk how these approaches help organizations in a world that is turbulent and unpredictable. But first of all, I'm going to ask you, Bjarte, to introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, thank you. So, hi everybody, Bjarte Bogsnes. In case you wonder, that's a Norwegian accent you're listening to. I have been working with Beyond Budgeting for 30 years now, and actually started out with this before there was anything called Beyond Budgeting, and helped a lot of companies all over the world going beyond budgeting over these years, including two of my employers, a petrochemicals company called Borealis, and then later a Norwegian company called Equinor, used to be called Statoil. I left corporate life a few years ago in order to be able to work even more with Beyond Budgeting, because there's a massive interest out there. I've also written two books. The latest one came a year ago with a foreword by Gary Hamel. And I'm also the chairman of the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, which is an international network of companies and organizations, individuals interested in Beyond Budgeting. And we actually had our last European conference in London just a few weeks ago with Dave Snowden as our keynote speaker. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. So, well, and my name is João. I'm Portuguese, as you might wonder from this name. And I'm a software engineer at heart, but during all of these years in my career, I became consultant helping companies to transition to operating models that really help flow and also a happier workplace. And that is why I also in the Team Topologies community, and more recently also with Beyond Budgeting community. And I saw that they are principle-based approaches. They are not prescriptive. They are not a five checklist step to the to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And I'm helping customers doing this type of things. I also have this public life phase, speaking conferences and giving workshops. And that's why we are here today. I challenge Bjarte to have this conversation and to share some thoughts. And here we are. So for the audience, and I think that let's start with that, for the audience that is not that well versed with Beyond Budgeting, can you give us a 5-minute short explainer about it, Bjarte?
I will give it a try. Beyond Budgeting is, I'm the first to admit that it is actually a somewhat misleading name, because it is about much more than budgets. It is about challenging traditional management, which is basically built on two assumptions. Number one, that you can't trust people, and number two, the future is predictable and plannable. And you know, and I know that that is not true, and that is what we are challenging in Beyond Budgeting, offering a model that, for that reason, addresses both leadership and management processes. There are 12 principles, 6 on leadership, 6 on management processes. And if you look at what Beyond Budgeting says about leadership, our views on purpose, autonomy, values, transparency, it is not unique as such, because there are many other models and communities out there having similar views on stuff like that. But most of these, maybe all of them, have not reflected very much or do not say very much about what kind of management processes are needed to activate these good leadership principles. And that is why we have then 6 management processes in Beyond Budgeting that you can, when you apply and design these management processes, you take inspiration from these leadership principles, and those management processes addresses key corporate processes ranging from target setting to forecasting, resource allocation, performance evaluation, and rewards, and also with a recommendation about the cadence or the rhythm of all these processes. So in designing your new management processes around those principles, again, you need to take inspiration from the leadership principles, but also from the outside environment and the VUCA world out there. That must also have implications for how we design our management processes. There are many similarities between Beyond Budgeting and Agile. They were actually born roughly at the same time, but there are also some major differences because Agile, and this is no criticism of Agile, but Agile was not designed as a way to run an enterprise. So when you're trying to scale Agile, these holes in Agile become visible because there was no need for the Agile manifesto to address this stuff back then, because again, it was about software development and how teams work. So these are the holes that Beyond Budgeting are filling, and the two together is a beautiful fit. And Beyond Budgeting is also a beautiful fit with other good stuff out there, like team topologies that we will talk more about today. So I think I'll leave it there, and then I might come back to giving more concrete examples of what this is as we speak.
Thanks for the segue. And well, talking about team topologies, it started. It's the book that Matthew and Manuel wrote back in 20 and was published in 2019, and they are DevOps practitioners, right? There was all of this wave of Agile, and then with the cloud, all of this wave of DevOps. And how I usually explain it to people is that back then there was just this thinking about how to organize teams, right? Because the team is the unit of delivery, because any meaningful work in an enterprise is done by a team. But back then, everyone just looked to the technical landscape. Oh, do we divide the teams to handle components, or do we divide teams to handle features? And no one took the human aspect, right? And when Manuel and Matthew wrote the book, they look for us as humans because we have a brain, and the brain is a very powerful organ, but also is a thing that gets tired very fast. So they base the ideas that we should limit or somehow manage the cognitive load of a team, right? Because if there are too much cognitive load with whatever in the enterprise, we cannot achieve our outcomes. Everything going to be more difficult. And I think that this is what got the community. I met Matthew a couple of months before. When I read the book, I was, this is what I was missing. And back then I was in a transformation here at the bank in the Netherlands, and start to apply it to generate these insights for people, right? So team topologies goes about, in the book, original book, 7 patterns, 4 of them to describe teams, all of them based on streams of value, and 3 interaction patterns that we can go a bit more later, but how teams interact with each other, because this is also something that I hear in some corners of the IT industry, is that we should remove dependencies, but sometimes we cannot remove them because they exist for a business reason. So the main thing is that how can we move to a non-blocking dependencies? How can we have teams that consume services that don't need approvals? How do we have all of these? Which then led me, and this is connection to beyond budgeting, to look outside of team topologies, because team topologies explains how these teams interact in a given situation and what we want to improve, but doesn't say anything about what is around, because there are management processes, there are all of these type of things, which led me to start to incorporate beyond budgeting exactly for this motive that you talk about these management tools, and to see beyond the budget, right? So looking to your experience, and you talk about the VUCA world, can you tell us more, why do we need these different approaches when it comes to design the management model, or even the organization, that we didn't need 50 or 60 years ago?
Well, first of all, I think it's in case people don't know how old this management process is. It is actually 100 years old, invented roughly 100 years ago. There was a book written called Budgetary Control, and the author was Mr. James O. McKinsey. And I never met Mr. McKinsey, but I don't actually think he was an evil man with evil intentions. I think he had the best intentions to help organizations back then perform better. This was management innovation 100 years ago, and I'm sure it worked pretty well 100 years ago, maybe even 50, 60 years ago. But today, this way of thinking, this way of leading, this way of managing is doing exactly the opposite. It has become more of a barrier than a support for getting out the best possible performance in organizations. Because I mean, you and it's not just about the VUCA world, but also about the competence level of employees, the expectations of employees that goes beyond that paycheck, right? Way beyond. So it's about taking reality seriously, not just the world out there, but also employees in the organization. So we need a management model fit for today's and tomorrow's realities. And traditional management, including budgeting, is not that. So we need something that is more coherent in many dimensions. And coherence is a key word in beyond budgeting. Because we need, as I touched upon, coherence between what we preach around leadership principles, autonomy, purpose, values, and so on, and what we practice in our management processes. And too often, so often, there is these horrible mismatches between what is said and what is done. Because I think many organizations, they have good intentions when it comes to people and leadership, but it doesn't help that you for instance, talk loud and warm about how fantastic employees we have on board, and we would be nothing without you, and we trust you so much, but not that much. Of course, we need detailed travel budgets, right? Or we talk equally loud and warm about collaboration and everybody in the same team and everybody in the same boat. Moving to the rewards is all about individual bonuses. I mean, this is hypocrisy, and people notice, and the words become hollow because the management processes has that opposite message. And what we do speaks 10 times louder than what we say. So that horizontal coherence, as we call it, between the leadership principles and the management processes is key. You also need a vertical coherence between these management processes, because those 6 processes, they start out in what I call finance territory: target setting, forecasting, resource allocation, then moving into human resource territory, performance evaluation and rewards. And you have to have the same philosophy and messages throughout that performance process, from finance into human resources. So you need coherence and the need for these 2 functions to work together. And of course, the last coherence that is needed is between the organization's management model and the outside world. And you might have heard about Ashby's law, which the requisite law of variety, which talks about this, that the kind of viability of an organization must always kind of exceed the volatility of its environment. If not, the organization will die. So coherence is key here, and this is needed more than ever. And you might ask, why hasn't it already happened massively worldwide? Well, stuff is definitely happening. There is a very positive trend. More companies are going in this direction. But at the same time, we are looking at quite radical stuff here that threatens a lot of executive beliefs and behaviors. And again, no offense to a lot of other good stuff out there, but much of that is stuff that you can take and put on top of what you already have of management processes, including budgeting. And then it doesn't threaten anyone, and you don't need to change how you think and behave. We have been going for the throat of those executive beliefs from day one. So this has huge implications for organizations and for executives, which makes it more painful than to implement a lot of other stuff out there.
Yeah, so which is an interesting journey, right? Because you start to practice these as CFO, if I'm not mistaken. You have been on the CFO side and human resources side, right? And now with your consultancy practice, you are in the middle of it, but not managing it, right? What was your trigger, right? What was the thing that you were observing saying, okay, something here is not right and we need to do this in a different way?
Well, let me first admit something. I used to be a big believer in this stuff. My first job, my first management job in this company called Equinor, was actually head of the corporate budget department. And for around 10 years, I practiced this stuff and believed in this stuff. Then I started in another company, this company called Bogsnes, where we got a chance. We were starting from scratch, and one of the values of the company was new, different, and better. So we were challenged. We were challenged to challenge everything we were doing, and we took that challenge and said that we want to kick out the budget. And the reason for that was that just 6 months earlier, we've had a finance meeting with finance people from all over Europe, where we were discussing how to improve the budgeting process. And then in that meeting, a guy suddenly asked, what if we don't budget at all? And I will never forget that day, because the room became dead silent. Everybody turned around, looked at the guy. Nobody said anything, but I guess we were all thinking the same. That guy probably needs a vacation. But then, sometimes later, again, we were all challenged to challenge what we were doing. And then that comment came back to us. And of course, we were not stupid. I mean, we knew that this process we were responsible for, it was not the smartest in the world, but to kick out the budget had been unthinkable up to then. And so we went back to the executives and told them that we would like to kick out the budget. And I recall the response, well, that sounds interesting, but what shall we then do instead? And we have to admit we don't have a clue. And maybe you should go and find out, was again the challenge posed to us. So we started to search for an alternative to budgeting. There was nothing called Beyond Budgeting back then. There was nothing on Google to help you search as well. So we couldn't find anything. And we were that close to go back and tell these guys that there is no alternative. And suddenly a guy on the team asked, why do we budget? What's the purpose of the budget? And here we need to think about the broad finance definition of a budget, not just cost budgets. And a budget actually has 3 different purposes. We use budget to set targets, financial targets, sales targets. At the same time, that budget is a kind of forecast of what next year shall look like in terms of cash flow, results, profits. And last but not least, that budget is a resource allocation mechanism. And the budget is trying to solve these three different purposes in one process and one set of numbers, which is not possible because they don't go together. I mean, an ambitious target cannot be the same as an expected outcome forecast. And when people know that they have access to resources just once a year, I mean, you get all that gaming about playing with the numbers and the sandbagging and the resource hoarding, and when budgets are approved, you get all the stupidity of having to spend your budget before year end and so on. So the solution to this was simply to separate the three purposes into three different processes: target setting, forecasting, resource allocation, which are the three first of the six management processes. And that cracked it all. And we were able to kick out the budget, and cost, for instance, in that company came down without budgets. That had been our biggest fear, but that cost would increase. They actually came down.
So people, in the end, people act in a responsible way as they act with their personal life, right? Because in the end, this is what I tell people when I'm on these transformations, right? So people decide to buy a house, to have kids, to go on vacations, and then we don't trust them the rest of the time to make these decisions. That in theory they are specialists, right? And especially in the world of software, it's well-paid professionals because we don't have many of those. Why we don't expand these? And I'm also curious. So companies do this journey, right? Start to have different management processes for these six different management topics. For the companies that start to do that, what did you observe at team level, right? Because also lots of companies are attached to the organizational chart. And by start breaking down this idea of budgets and pools of money that need to be spent towards let's use money to make the company grow, what did you saw there, even with the organizational structure, for instance?
Well, first of all, I mean, there is actually a principle on the leadership side in Beyond Budgeting that addresses organization. But we are actually quite agnostic when it comes to structure because we think this can work in any structure. I personally think that many are too focused on the organizational structure. I think that the key is to change that. I'm not sure about that. In some cases, it might be needed, but often I think organizational charts, they don't tell the full story. If you look at the Equinor organization chart, it looks quite traditional, hierarchical, but it says nothing about all the collaboration taking place across. It says nothing about the low power distance in the organization and so on. So, but what we observed without changing the structure as such was this was very kind of when we explained what the intentions were, it was very positively received. Of course, a lot of questions, both from managers and finance people. Of course, we also observed some scared people, scared of how this will work in practice. And some of those most scared were actually managers who didn't like to make decisions. Because if you don't like to make decisions, the more detailed your cost budget is, the less decisions you have to make because those decisions are made for you and you even have somebody to blame, right? if some of those decisions are unpopular. So this, I mean, this is not easier in any way. This takes more leadership, not just from leaders, but from everybody. And the big majority really thrived on that. There were some people that did not thrive at all and actually were really struggling. Some of them left, some found, but generally, when people have tried this, not just for 1 year, but for at least a few years, I mean, almost everybody realized that this is a much better way. And now Equinor has been doing this for 20 years, and I don't think you would find anyone that wants to go back to the old days.
Yeah, because this is also I'm being studying a branch of social sciences, and this is also what social scientists that study this type of environments, as you said, where people have freedom to operate within certain constraints that most of us in our lifetime never experienced that. Lots of people talk about autonomy and empowerment, but actually we don't know what that is. Of course, there is more behind that, but feels the same. You mentioned that in your first experience, cost went down, and this is what you folks were afraid. But I also can imagine that other things like customer happiness today measured with NPS and less accidents at work, less absenteeism, people missing days to work, also that happen, which are good proxies to show that the system is working better.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, the list of benefits is long, including what you just talked about. I mean, more engaged people, um, uh, you become more attractive as an employer, less turnover, and again, the fact that there's no discussion about going back is for me a quite solid sign that this is good stuff that works. So, and of course, I mean, people in these teams, they experienced not just more autonomy, but also more sensible targets because they were allowed to set most of the targets themselves. A more sensible performance evaluation, more fair rewards, and so on. So it goes way. Yeah, the list of benefits is long.
Which is very interesting, right? Because one of the things that I see, especially with targets, is people when go on this journey expect that people sandbag, and actually, when we show people that they have the keys to the house and they need to continue to operate their house to provide a good service to their customers, those targets can, or those, let's call targets, are very ambitious that even management didn't expect that, which is a positive sign. Um, what what are the
By the way, one reflection on targets, because the what we often see on these journeys is that companies get braver along the way. What is scary today is not scary tomorrow because it works. And the last discussion we had before I left was actually around targets, because some of the best beyond budgeting companies, they don't have targets. They operate without targets. They have great performance. And that was the discussion we took in Equinor, because I think most organizations are on autopilot when it comes to targets. They think that if you measure something, what is measured should have a target, and that target should be set from above in order to punish or reward. Well, there are many issues with targets, and one is that when you sit in the autumn and you're trying to make a target for next year, I mean, then how on earth do you know if there's a lot of uncertainty with energy prices and wars and the list is long? How on earth do you know what that number is? Should it be 32 or 28? But you have to conclude that the answer becomes 29.2, that everything then shall be, that becomes the definition of good performance, hitting 29.2. But if the purpose of these targets is performance evaluation, because some people would say that it's a purpose, well, of course, it's much easier to evaluate performance afterwards when the facts is on the table. The tailwind, the headwind, you know what happened, instead of kind of guessing a number a year earlier. So the discussion we had was, can we operate without targets? The conclusion back then became that there is less targets. We measure stuff, and what is measured still measure stuff. What is measured can have targets, but it doesn't have to have targets. And if there are targets, most of these should be set by these teams themselves. So so I think we are on autopilot on too much stuff that we are doing in our organizations, because we've always done it and everybody else is doing it. But yeah.
It's an interesting metaphor, right? Autopilots and picking up that. What are the other things that are also that you see that organizations are on autopilot?
Well, the whole traditional management game, again, because I mean we've always done it like this, and everybody else is doing it, and what is so fascinating here, which is also a big paradox, is that all these organizations out there, they love innovation, right? They want to be leading edge, unique, right on the forefront, better than everybody else. But that enthusiasm for innovation, that seems to be limited to technology innovation, into products and services. But there is also something called management innovation that we are talking about today. And management innovation, is that great? Oh no, that is scary. Kicking out the budget, are you crazy? And the consequence is that while the technology innovation scenery is extremely crowded because everybody is doing it, management innovation is not yet the crowded place because it is scary, which is good news for brave companies who dare to explore and embrace also this kind of innovation, because you can get just as much competitive advantage out of management innovation as you can get from technology innovation. So it's quite fascinating how I in my presentations I have an overview of a packed slide with logos of companies on the journey, and I know when that slide is coming up, the first thing executives especially are looking for, and finance people, are there other companies in our business on that list? And of course we know why the questions pops up in their head, because if there are no other company in their business, then we can't do it. It's scary, right? But if this was some kind of technology innovation that we were kind of talking about, of course, the last thing you would want was to have your competitors up and kind of already being there, right? So it's amazing, and maybe that's a kind of autopilot as well, being kind of so not realizing the paradox here on innovation.
Which is the thing, right? So touching on that, there is an example of a gaming company a while back. So they start to do the games that gain popularity with the internet and multiplayer and all of these. The company back then called Steam, and they had a manual that said, well, every employee has a standing desk with wheels, and you just need to move the desk across the building to collaborate with other people, right? And well, they are still making games and being a marketplace, but my hypothesis is that this type of management style is what helped them to gain against competition. So my point is that if we really have these type of tools, management tools around, and people have access to those, right? Because the access to transparent and accurate data, it's important. They will find ways to serve the customers or to create new services or whatever by themselves. So the technology innovation will happen anyway, but will happen more naturally through experimentation, through some bets that will help. And that is what I also observe and came to me when I read Beyond Budgeting, all the books from the series. It was, here is the things that can unblock the technical innovation, because if not, just center with one person that has one idea and just tries to push things forward, which sometimes work, most of times doesn't, which is interesting to see where we are going as an industry. And so we see this holistic change, right? And a focus on the management model. When you have these talks with the executives, even, you are invited because they are curious, what is the first reaction from them when they they start to understand that they need to change all of those processes to really enable the company to go faster or to achieve more?
Well, it varies, depending. I mean, because I've seen all kind of reactions from outright fear to even if I was invited to genuine curiosity about this. But of course, I mean that question of other in our business doing this always come up, and beyond that, of course, I mean the question is how to get started, because I mean when I'm invited in, I mean that's typically then some decisions are made already about at least they are interested in this. So and there are many ways to get started, but I always recommend these executives to establish a strong and common case for change before they do anything at all. Because I've seen examples of companies getting really excited and kind of jumping into this without being clear about what kind of problems are they really trying to solve and what do we want to move towards. And this case for change must be kind of shared in the entire organization. So the bigger the organization, the longer time this will take. After that, we typically recommend organizations to start with the separation of the budget purposes into target setting, forecasting, and resource allocation. Not as a goal in itself, but that separation enables you to improve each one in ways impossible when it was all bundled in that one set of numbers in a budget. So then you can have great discussions about setting better targets. For instance, setting what we call relative targets, inspired by football. As I often say, I've yet to meet a football team stating that the ambition for next season is to score 37 goals and get 39 points, which are typically budget goals. For them, it's all about performing well against peers and hopefully better than everybody else. And that relative way of thinking, whether it's internal benchmarking or external benchmarking, can be applied also in organizations as a way to describe performance, as a way to stimulate learning, and also as a way to actually replace targets. Because in so many organizations, when they have these internal league tables up and running and people experience the comparison as fair and relevant, which is important, then you don't need to set targets because nobody likes to be laggards, right? Everybody wants to improve. And isn't that what we really want, that everybody is trying to do their best? And at the same time, using this to stimulate learning so that those struggling on that league table is contacting those who are doing better. And of course, for that to happen, you might need some help from the reward system, which means that then individual bonus is not very smart, but having a common bonus scheme, for instance, driven by how the organization is performing versus competitors, that would give everybody a reason to help other people. And once again, an example of coherence in the performance process. You can't discuss targets in isolation and rewards in isolation. You have to look at this together. Then you can start to improve your forecasting process, introduce the rolling forecasting, which some do, get the gaming, the politics out of it, so you know you can trust the numbers. Because in this model, a forecast is just a forecast. It is not the build into a target negotiation, because that's a separate process. It is not an application for resources because, again, separate process. It's just a forecast. And you have nothing to gain by gaming on these numbers. And last but not least, resource allocation, which now can be done much more dynamic and continuous. And here we have it's a long story, but we have a set of different mechanisms or tools as alternative to traditional cost budgets. Where it is useful to separate between projects and investments on one hand and operating cost on the other hand. You need somewhat different mechanisms. But those mechanisms could range from kind of burn rate guiding as an overall one number constraint. It could be unit cost constraints that you can spend more if you sell more, or if you produce more, and vice versa. It could be benchmark unit cost, or it could be nothing at all. No budget, no target, no nothing, just actual cost that is monitored and through trend reporting. And if it looks okay, you do nothing. If it looks a bit strange, then of course the necessary questions are asked, and typically there will be normally good explanations. But this is important. This is about showing trust in the organization. And if you show trust in an organization, someone will abuse it. In Equinor, it has happened, it will happen again. That is not the issue. The issue is, how do we respond when trust is abused? Because the simple but wrong response is to punish everybody because somebody did something wrong. I often tell this story about when I'm out traveling. The first thing I'm checking in my hotel room at night is what kind of clothing hangers they have. Is it the one with a hook, or is it a stupid one that you have to fumble into this little hole that you can't see? And of course, we all prefer the one with a hook. And I think we all know the reason why some hotels offer us the stupid one. It's about a few stolen hangers with a hook, right? And the response, to punish everybody because somebody did something wrong. The right response when trust is abused is to take that very firm talk with those involved and let it have the necessary consequences. This is not about being soft in any way. It is about and evasive in any way. It's again about not putting everybody in jail because somebody did something wrong. So yeah. And then on projects, our recommendation is to let the bank always be open, as we say, so that the line can at any time ask for funding for a project, completely independent of when in the year it is. They ask when that project is mature and ready for approval. And a yes or a no depends on two things. How good is the project, and do we have the capacity as things look today? So a much more dynamic resource allocation. This is Agile talk about continuous delivery of software. This is continuous delivery of decisions and funding.
It's interesting that you talk about that, right? Because this is, where I grew as professional, and I think that it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same principles, right? Because most of this functional behavior that I saw was people trying to make all of these in the 12-month cycles of budgets. So they need 150K to do some experiment, to put something out. Today with cloud, it's easy, right? Even cheaper than before the cloud. And they just make everything big because it needs to be 12 months, because we need to show that the teams are busy, because. And suddenly we need a big piece of money, but we just want to experiment for 1 month and a half and see if this sticks, right? Which leads again to these management tools. If those things are there, we know that to run our business we need a stream of money, some baseline, right? And then we have these spikes or all of these ideas that need a bit more cash. Why we don't have fun things like VC companies or whatever other methods that are not new, right? Because the financial worlds have tools to manage these, right? It's a thing that still, I cannot comprehend on certain areas, especially with software, because software is different from other things that we build as humans, right? Because the process of build this bottle, if I want to redo it, I need to destroy it and start the process again. With software is meant to change in production, way more easy. Still, we apply techniques that don't fit. It's quite interesting. One of the things that you mentioned is that we need this holistic view, right? And you talk about a couple of minutes ago, people get excited, but without the case for change. What are the other traps when people go on this journey that people should be aware of?
A classical trap is that people get the budget purpose separation, and they look at the three different purposes: target setting, forecasting, resource allocation. And they think that the simplest one of the three is forecasting, and they implement rolling forecasting. Typically, then you update your forecast every quarter. You always look 5 quarters ahead. That's fine. But when I hear this, my question is always, okay, but how will you then solve the two other budget purposes, target setting and resource allocation? And some say that we will do that through the rolling forecast. And if that is what you do, then you have just introduced rolling budgeting, right? 4 times a year, and a lot of pissed off people. So you're doomed to fail. Other people say that, well, we will introduce rolling forecasting, but continue to have budgets for targets and resource allocation. And well, that can work, but then you are solving very few of the many serious problems with this process. So our very strong advice is that these three cannot be introduced kind of sequential. First we do this and then maybe the others later. It has to be done at the same time. Classical mistake. And unfortunately, sometimes driven by the large consulting companies, because they also know that this is a big model. They are kind of trying to carve out some of it that is less big and not that big and not that scary. And typically forecasting is that's often where they start, but it doesn't work.
Interesting. Thanks for this advice. And you talk a lot also about companies doing that. Apart from the companies in the books, there are any other companies that you can name them about the good stuff that they are doing on management innovation?
Well, I'd like to share with you 2 examples from the public sector in Norway, because this is, and I'm saying this because I'm really excited about this now kind of also entering the public sector. And the first one is from the large Norwegian public organization that deals with labor and pensions, and they have 12, it's called NAV, NAV. They have 12 client or customer contact centers across Norway. And they started out a bit cautious, doing 2 pilots in 2 of these, where the message was that there is no cost budget, you can spend what is needed to do a good job, but not more. And when the year was over, they could look at the results, and this was the first year of the pandemic. So all contact centers had lower costs, but none of them had bigger cost reductions than the 2 pilots, minus 50% in both. So they got braver year after 6 or 12, and today all 12 are running without cost budgets. The second example is from a Norwegian municipality called Sogndal. It's on the west coast of Norway, a beautiful place, which is the first municipality ever that I've heard of worldwide that is implementing beyond budgeting. They are going, for instance, for self-managed teams with no schedule about how fast this shall kind of be implemented, because these teams kind of decide for themselves that now we want to take this route. They get inspired by seeing neighboring teams doing this and seeing that it works well. And again, they have seen cost reductions in some of these new teams of up to 50%. And not just cost reductions, because that is not necessarily the main aim, but a much more sensible use of cost. Right? So more of what we call good cost and less of what we call bad cost. So an amazing case. We actually had these guys presenting at our last London conference, and I think it was one of the best presentations we had at that conference. So I'm excited because the public sector needs beyond budgeting just as much as the private sector, and it is just as relevant for the public sector. And some people say that, well, because you have this funding regime in the public sector where you as an organization get the bag of money every year, they said that, well, because of that mechanism, this can't be done. And I don't agree, because even if you as a municipality is given a big bag of money from above once a year, why do you need the same day to turn around and split that big bag up in tens of thousands of small bags and hand it out to the tiniest box on the organization chart? Why not treat this as a constraint and optimize in the best possible way within that constraint? And that means not taking all these decisions immediately, but taking cost, delegate and let the organization take cost decisions continuously. Then you do cost forecasting. And if that cost forecasting is telling you that we might exceed this constraint, and you need to be better at saying no than yes for a while, and vice versa. So again, much more continuous resource allocation. So it is absolutely possible in the public sector as well.
That case of the municipality was really inspiring, especially because, right, you have the public servants that are employees, but then there is, in any democratic system, the heads rotate every 4 or 8 years or 5 years, depends on political cycles. And it's a very, very interesting one. With NAV, it's very interesting that you mentioned them because they were, as far as I know, one of the first early adopters of team topologies on technology side. Exactly how to optimize the usage of platforms, right? Because there are common assets that are shared between different teams. How do we do this, and how do we maintain this continuous feedback and communication between everyone? Because in the end, it's a public organization that needs to serve, well, in this case, everyone in Norway. And it's very interesting to see how an organization picks these approaches if they really, really want to set apart and to create better services. It's seeing this more and more, and in off also we were talking about a company that, although not officially with Beyond Budgeting, it's doing that as well, and they also use bits or parts of the organization use team topology. So I'm very happy that people are looking for principle-based approaches rather than the recipe, 5-step recipe. All right, we are getting to the end, and so in your journey, right? And of course, you are biased because you are in the eye of the hurricane doing this change. But what did you observe with Beyond Budgeting community? What is, of course, more adoption, right? But also, what was the new tools that community create? What was the things that you were, oh, I was not expecting that. That is a brilliant idea that has happened in the last 20, 25 years.
Well, I think one thing I have observed and also has happened with myself is that and especially after I spent some years setting up human resources, the leadership side of Beyond Budgeting has kind of become bigger and more important, and I think that goes for the whole community. And I recall then when I started to speak at conferences 30 years ago, it was only finance conferences. And then there comes some invitations from human resource conferences and from agile conferences. And now, I mean, I'm speaking at more non-finance conferences than finance conferences. So this is kind of spreading outside of finance. And yeah, I think that's been an important development.
Which is good. More people picking this up.
Absolutely.
Right. So I don't know if you have any final remark.
Well, one question we often get is, well, you guys have been doing this for 30 years now, and you are, I mean, compared to some other great stuff out there, whether we talk about agile or OKRs or team topologies for that case, or other stuff, I mean, which has really seen this kind of big been growing extremely fast and become really, really big. I mean, things take longer with beyond budgeting. And as I touched upon earlier, I mean, that is correct, but there are reasons for this, because this is big stuff. It's radical stuff. It really it challenges a lot of executive thinking and finance thinking, and HR thinking for that sake, which some of this other stuff don't do to the same extent. And I would rather have something that grows slowly, steadily, sustainably, year by year, than something that is boom and bust. We don't want this to be kind of commercialized as well. So that's why we do not offer a certification. It's a very that is a decision that we were very clear about, because I mean we have given up a nice revenue stream, but I mean we have seen what certification and that commercial circus can do to other communities, and it's not very nice what I'm seeing. So but I'm very good stuff shall take time. It will take time, but I'm convinced this will happen. I don't care if it will be called beyond budgeting or business agility or whatever. That's not important. But I'm convinced that in 15, 20 years, when we look back at traditional, what was still mainstream management thinking in 2025, we're going to smile, even have a laugh. Just like we today smile about the days before the internet or the smartphone, for that sake. It isn't that long ago. So it will happen, and organizations have a choice. They can choose to be early movers, or they can choose to be laggards, dragged into this as one of the last ones. And I know what I would have chosen.
Thanks. And I think that we are getting there day by day. Companies are feeling peer pressure, which is also good. The benefits of internet and good use cases. So I think that definitely the next 25, 30 years, we're going to look back and find more cool stuff that we did on this space. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time for this hour and to being live with me discussing these topics. I also know that we just touch the surface, because this is radical stuff, big stuff that touches the foundations of lots of the companies. I recommend the people that, read the books around Beyond Budgeting. There are a couple of authors. Join community, also join community with Team Topologies. Some of these topics are discussed. And, see you around. And thanks very much.